why did you decide to pursue a career in psychology and as an academic?
Well, I was when I went to Harvard, I didn't have a career in mind, and I was just trying stuff out. My mother was religious. She brought me up going to Sunday school and Sundays and church and stuff like that. And I didn't agree with it. And she said, "Well, you ought to take some courses where you really learn about from good theologians." One time she moved to Georgia at one point, and she said, "I'm going to invite a minister to the house to convert you." So I said, "Sure." So he and I talked, and I said, "Well, what's your view?" He said, "Well, church is kind of a cocktail party." And it went downhill from there. I said, "Mom, that didn't work very well." He was ridiculous. So at Harvard, I took first a course on philosophy from a sniveling cynic, sort of like Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged slime balls. And I couldn't remember a single useful thing from the course, except that everything was cynical. Then I took a course from the world's most famous Protestant theologian, Paul Tillich. And he said, somebody said to him, what is, how did he phrase it? What is God? I said, "That's a good question." He said, "A God," in a very thick German accent, "God is your ultimate concern, ultimate concern." So I said, "Okay, supposing money is your ultimate concern." He says, "That is your God." I said, "This isn't a very promising introduction to philosophy." So in the final, I wrote a criticism of religion, and he gave me an A. I said, pretty much I'm finished with academic philosophy and academic theocracy. So that was really it until, except for the novels, till I got to Cornell and they started giving me tape lectures. So I rejected religion. Really bored me to death, absolutely, and didn't do anything for me. So I just finally, when I was 18, I said, and my roommates and I said, "We're atheists. We don't believe in it." So none of us did. So that was it. So anyway, from then on, it was objectivist.
So why did you decide to get into psychology?
Well, I wasn't sure what to do. And so I took courses in a variety of fields, and among them psychology. I knew Freud and I knew Skinner, and I didn't think they were that great. But I didn't take any courses from them. But I got somewhat interested in psychology, and behaviorism in experimental psychology was the dominant theme. Skinner was at Harvard. I didn't take any courses with Skinner. And of course, Freud was also there because of you being motivated. So Skinner was environmental determinism, and Freud was subconscious determinism. They're both determinist in different ways. So I didn't really see any benefit to that. So I started taking psychology, and my father at that time was a very successful businessman in Chicago. He was divorced from my mother, remarried, moved to Chicago. He's head of a big railroad company. And I was kind of awestruck. It was one of the bigger railroad car companies. And so I thought that's one possibility. And I started reading up on business, and I read a book called The Organization Man, which is a very famous book at the time, and it projected business as very conformist. And I said, I don't think I like that. No. So then I said, I think I'll look more into psychology. So I took various courses, and I finally ended up majoring in psychology. And one of my teachers was a Skinnerian student, but he wasn't anti-consciousness. And he was my advisor. So I went to him when I was a senior. I said, I'm not quite sure what to do. I'm interested in business. My father seems very successful and likes it a lot. And I like psychology, but I don't like rat psychology and pigeon psychology. He said, why don't you combine them? I said, what's that? He said, it's industrial psychology. I said, I've never heard of it. What is that? He said, it's psychology applied to business. I said, wow, what is it? Where would you study that? He said Cornell and the University of Chicago. So I applied to both places. I got accepted at Cornell with a scholarship. So I paid my tuition. I said, well, I'm going to have to try it. I don't know what it's going to be like. I have to try it. And I don't know if I can good enough to do it. So my advisor there was a famous woman psychologist, one of the earliest women industrial psychologists when women weren't accepted. And so I liked her. And so I took the first exam. And before the exam, the students could hand in their own questions for the exam, and she might use them or might not use them. So you could get over 100. So anyway, so I took the exam and I got 105 out of 100. She says, oh, this guy must be pretty able and smart. So I got an assistantship there. And then another one of my professors, Ryan, T.A. Ryan, was very anti-behaviorist. And he wanted to study consciousness. And in the Ryan and Smith early industrial psychology textbook, okay, there was a graph of an experiment done in 1935 by an Englishman. And it was on goal setting. The only experiment I'd ever seen or heard of on goal setting. I said, wow, that sounds really interesting. So I talked to my TA Ryan. He said, oh yeah, I think that's a promising way to go. And he was writing a book on cognitive approach to motivation. He didn't like behaviorism or Freudianism. And so I read all his preliminary chapters. And I did my dissertation on goal setting. And that turned out well. And so then it was time to find a job. I could have gone to Sears, which was a very big, profitable company in those days. They offered me a job in business in the Sears headquarters. And I could have gone to a research institute. And I said to the Sears guy, I work for you. You tell me what to do, right? He said, well, yeah. I said, well, that's legitimate. And I went to the researcher. I said, what can I do on my own? He said, I can help you get a grant from the Navy to study goal setting. So I went there and I got a grant to study goal setting and started doing research. That's when I started. So that went on for, I'll tell you later, 50 years. So my dissertation came out well. I got a grant from the Office of Naval Research, started doing other experiments and getting them published. And at that time, the two major forces, of course, behaviorism, which is conditioning, mindless conditioning. And then there's Freudianism, which is all motivation is subconscious. So you can't really measure it by conscious methods. So you got to take projective tests, which were telling stories about pictures, called the TAT, traumatic apperception test. So I didn't find either of those were too promising. So I started conscious goal setting, and nobody else had done it before. And so I started getting published, and people took to it because it was a kind of study that worked. There are a lot of crap is published in scientific journals. One-shot things which nobody replicates. They don't make any sense. My stuff kept coming out, and other people did it. Said, wow, here's a motivational approach that worked well. And I got a following, and then everyone started to do goal setting studies. Then a colleague at Toronto started doing his own research. He rediscovered goal setting, studying people in the woodworking field, people who chop trees. And he found goal setting also. So we started working together, which we did for decades afterwards. And around 90, we discovered there's been hundreds of studies in goal setting by ourselves and other people. The other people said, I'm going to do this because it actually works. So I said, let's write a book. And we put all the research of 400 studies together through induction. And we published a book called The Theory of Goal Setting and Task Performance, which was became a very big hit book. And we covered everything known from beginning to end. And that's really got us going even more so. And then even more people do it. And we did other books and the like. So that's how I came to be. When I went to graduate school, Skinnerian was still primary. And when I went to my first job, I started writing things against behaviorism, which was kind of risky because it was considered so axiomatic. I'll tell you a story. I had a colleague who said, I can't, even with you privately in another room, I can't use the word consciousness. I can't do it, except for right now, I can't do it. I said, why not? He said, because people will think I'm a raving mystic and I'm against science. And I was shocked by this. Then I talked to another professor. I said, well, what about you? He said, well, I know it's wrong, but I can't say it in public. He said, well, when I get tenure, then I'll talk about what I really believe. And he never did, because people were terrified of the status quo, conformity. And part of the reason is they didn't have a philosophy to oppose it. Now, by that time, I knew objectivism, and I knew consciousness was an axiom, therefore irrefutable. I knew free will was valid, therefore determinism was wrong. I started writing and citing Ayn Rand wherever relevant, not artificially, wherever relevant, right away in articles. And then when I wrote articles where her name would be relevant, I would also cite her. And then at conferences, I would talk about Ayn Rand's views on something. And I even got known for this of goal setting and Ayn Rand. So I got kind of famous. And then they said, well, why don't you do a review of Atlas Shrugged for the main magazine in business? Oh, really? I can do whatever I want? I said, yeah, you can say whatever you want. So I'm going to do it. So I published a review of Atlas Shrugged. So I got known even more so for that. And then another person wrote me to do a book on Ayn Rand's ethics for a journal. Wow, I can do whatever I want? Said, yes. Okay, I'm going to do it. And I dissed the other theories. And I said, here's Ayn Rand's theory. And then later, so as I got known for both things, the editor of a series of books called, what was it called? The Sociology of Knowledge. They wanted me to edit an entire book. I said, I can do whatever I want on a whole book. I said, yep. So I did it on postmodernism. So I don't know if you know from your courses how bad that is.
Yes.
Complete subjectivism. So I said, I want to do this. Ayn Rand said, you may know this, when you see an irrational philosophy, don't try to refute it. Try to ask what would happen if you lived by it on a daily basis. So here's what I did for the plan of the book. I said, okay, I'm going to invite several postmodernists to write part one. And I knew who they were. I wrote them all. Can you do a postmodernist essay, postmodernism in management? Say whatever you want. I'm not going to edit you. I said, okay, we'll do it. Fine. Then I picked 5 critics, but not great ones, but critical as they could have without philosophy. I said, okay, could you write a critic of postmodernism? I said, yeah, we'll do that. I said, part 3 is for me. So part 3 started with Ayn Rand's advice. I pretended to start a company. It was a fiction story. And I was a business guy who had taken philosophy in college. I'm going to start a business. So I said, okay, I'm going to start it using, as the fictional guy, using postmodernism literally. No beating around the bush. I'm going to do exactly what it says. So I went through thinking of the business, how to hire employees, how to deal with marketing, how to deal with customers, how to hire. And I'm going to write a whole story of the sequence of the beginning all the way to the end where the business fails and he commits suicide. Okay. Yeah. Then I had Ankar. So that was a 2-part essay. The second part of the essay was Objectivism as an antidote to postmodernism. That followed the story. So Ankar I wrote a draft of that part, and he.
And what year was this?
What year?
Yeah.
Hold on. (2003).
Okay, so Ankar was pretty young. I mean.
Yeah, but he wrote. I'll tell you more.
30s, but...
Not only did he help me edit that one, the technical philosophy, I needed his help. So he wrote say, here's the alternative to postmodernism. And then I also invited him, said, would you do for part 2 an article on Kant as the founder of postmodernism? In other words, guaranteed publication for him, not twice. So he wrote that as the part 2 critic, as the best critic. So we had him followed by part 3, and then a little slam to postmodernism at the very end of that chapter. By the way, the one I just told you about was the business one, is in the Ayn Rand archives. I sent it to Mike Berliner. It's in the Ayn Rand archives. The one by Ankar, I was told he had written a longer one, but may not have ever finished it. So I don't know if that's in the archives, although I sent it to Ankar so he could keep it for the files. So it was just an anti-Kantian article, right. Like you can't see because you have eyes, you can't hear, yeah. You have a mind because you can't think. So I don't know if that's in the archives, but the other one is. So
I'll be sure to ask him.
Yeah. So I sent him copies of both of those, so for his own file. So so then this kind of added on. I got a guy was writing a book of invited chapters on managerial wisdom, and I knew him. He said, "Would you do a whole chapter on objectivism? A whole chapter just on objectivism? Really?" Usually I could talk shortly, but never invited. I did a whole chapter on objectivism as the best philosophy for living on Earth. And they said, fine, we're not going to edit it at all. So this kind of thing mushroomed, okay? So, which was very nice for me, and I got other invitations also. So that's sort of my career